Thanks for being with us today on our New Year's Eve special on Transit Unplugged, the world's leading transit executive podcast. I have with me a new friend, Rudy Salo from LA. He and I today are going to delve into what we think are the hottest topics coming for transit in 2025. Rudy, welcome to the show.
Paul, thank you very much. And I love the fact that this is being released in 2025 because, dare I say, 2025 could be one of the most exciting years in transportation as we know it.
Really? Tell me why.
There's a lot of very interesting reasons why. I think that for the first time in my lifetime, when I'm talking about transportation, people are not just rolling their eyes going, oh my God, this guy's talking about this boring topic, right? And by the way, to be fair, I don't hang out with a bunch of transit folk, right? I mean, I was right about to say normal people, but that's pretty insulting. Yeah. I hang out with non-transit professionals most of the time. I happen to be the one that's the most passionate about transit. But people are talking about transportation. What are they talking about, Paul? They're talking about robotaxis. I happen to live in Los Angeles. Robotaxis have been launched here. They're not yet in my area of Los Angeles because I live in the South Bay, kind of close to LAX, and they currently don't go to LAX. But I'm sure with the Olympics coming here, something's going to happen. People are talking about electric vehicles. They're talking about, the credit's going away. Oh, what kind of charger do you have? Oh, do you have a hybrid? Oh, what kind of EV do you have? I mean, it's very, very exciting to talk about EVs. I also think that people are, I hate to point out a big name in transportation, and I'm not trying to start off controversially in any way, shape, or form, but Elon Musk brings a lot of attention to the transportation industry. For whatever you feel about him,
yeah, absolutely.
The world's richest man happens to be in transportation, Paul. So obviously, we're going to talk about transportation, and I think a lot of people are going to be focusing on what this new Department of Government Efficiency is going to do, what it's not going to do, and how that's going to affect transportation. I think this could be an extremely important couple of years.
Yeah, I'm right with you, Rudy. I think we're at a pivotal time. I've been in conversations, and we're recording this in December, but I've been in conversations just in the last 2 weeks with a number of top public transportation executives, CEOs, company CEOs. They're all, a little bit of trepidation, but a lot of opportunity. Rudy, I just was in LA, right? So our last episode of Transit Unplugged TV for this past month of November was from Los Angeles. And we filmed there an episode with the top leaders at LA Metro, with some of the top leaders at LA DOT, and they were talking about a car-free transit-first Olympics. Now, as we mentioned in the opening, you have a blog, you have a podcast. You're, in addition to being an attorney and someone who kind of advises the transportation industry in a lot of aspects, especially when it comes to financing bonds, et cetera, municipal bonds. You're deeply involved and ingrained in the LA Metro scene. Give us some of your predictions or what your thoughts are about where LA Metro is now. I mean, we just did a podcast with Stephen Tu, who's the head of station experience. I think you listened to that one where he talked about the new things they're doing there to address vandalism, crime on the system, people feeling safe, doubling down on fares like a lot of systems are. Give us your general thoughts and then where you think we're headed on the Olympic preparations for, a car-free, where they're going to have to borrow 2,000 buses and all that. Any thoughts you have on that, being that you're right there in LA? Absolutely.
And I'm really glad you brought up that topic because I'm somebody that's extremely passionate about transportation in Los Angeles. I think you saw the video that I posted of me in my office when I had just put up a map of the Pacific Electric Railway, a map from 1926. And then right underneath it is like an artistic rendering of the LA Metro system. So when I say I think about this stuff, I think about it with deep passion and I care about it. So I happen to live in the South Bay of Los Angeles. South Bay is everything that's kind of south of LAX. Traditionally, the South Bay was one of the first areas of Los Angeles that was serviced by the Green Line, right?
Okay.
Which was called the train to nowhere. It happened to go to North Redondo Beach to Norwalk. It's funny because I happened to grow up pretty close to Norwalk, and then I lived in North Redondo Beach for a long time. And that train has now, I bring this up because that train has now been converted as of a month ago to the new K line, which is going to be, kind of along the west side of Los Angeles. And right now there's a disconnect between the K line isn't complete yet. but hopefully soon it's going to go right through the LAX People Mover and connect to the Expo line. So right now, I happen to be living in an area that's like in this weird transit desert. So if I sound a little bit irritated, it's because I can't, my current transit use has been disrupted, but I'm hopeful for the future. And I'm doubling down on hopeful for the future for the LA Metro for a lot of reasons. Number one, Paul, I'm seeing a lot more focus on making things safe on Metro. I use the Metro system. I use a combination of the light rail. I use the commuter express. I use buses. I use the Silver Line. I use the Route 232. I mean, I'm on the transit system and I like it. In fact, like I actually try to plot out if I have a spare Sunday or some spare time, I'll actually plot out like different ways to get to places in Los Angeles. Like, for example, as a result of this transit disruption that occurred with the switching over from the C to K line, I tried to figure out, okay, well, how can I get to SoFi Stadium to go see the LA Rams by not using a car? Unfortunately, it wasn't an easy thing to do because of the disruption of this line, but hopefully soon enough, that'll be all interconnected and I could just take the K line to the downtown Inglewood station and then have a shuttle over from there. Speaking of Inglewood and speaking of the Olympics and speaking of the future of the LA Metro system, there is some disappointment in the fact that the Inglewood, it's called I forgot what it was called, the Inglewood connector, where they were planning on having a little people mover to connect you from the different rail lines to the stadiums that are now built in and around Inglewood. I don't know if you were here, if they took you around Inglewood, but that's going to be where a lot of the Olympics are going to take place because the new Clippers Stadium is there. It's called the Intuit Dome. We have the SoFi Stadium. And there's a lot happening there for the Olympics. And they've got to figure something out. Unfortunately, I think light rail is out of the question because there's just not enough time.
Right.
And Paul, it's kind of a pain. Parking in that area is expensive. It's not an easy ingress. It's not easy egress. It's kind of painful. And I do think that should be the area of focus over the next several years because there's just a lot happening in the Inglewood area, a lot of concerts, a lot of sporting events. So my hope is, if anybody from LA Metro is listening to this, is that they do work on solving something for the Olympics. Now, is there actually going to be a car-free Olympics? No. Why? Well, I just gave you one reason, because the Inglewood People Mover is not going to happen. I think when they first said that, there was still hope that was going to be built. But I think now, as a result of that not getting built, that is just not going to be a reality. Will it be mostly car-free? I hope so. I plan on only using public transportation when the Olympics are here. And I'm hopeful that Los Angelinos will help out the tourists, help people out to navigate the system. The system is not intuitive, Paul. I still to this day, even though there's apps, even though you can go on to Google, even though Metro, I think, does a pretty good job of putting out information, people just don't feel comfortable using transportation in Los Angeles. Why? Because we grow up with the car. You figure out how to get around with a car. Back in the day, all of us teenagers, all of us Gen Xers, we had a Thomas guide. Now these days with Google Maps, you can drive everywhere. I do think, though, that there's hope with the younger generation. A lot of younger kids are not even bothering getting their driver's licenses, right? And I do think that we should be focusing on those people who don't want to drive. We should be helping them. There should be more support for them. I think that is something where, I know this project that you and I are working on, might be one of the focuses on is how can we help people not to drive? How can we help people navigate public transportation in an easier way? And I commend LA Metro for making it safer. And I think that needs to be the focus. And they also need to get like people ambassadors, people who know how to use the system to promote it. And that's what I try to do with that newsletter blog that I have, which I call The Commute, which is on Substack. I try to post videos of me riding Metro and showing, how to navigate it. And I think if we can get more people excited about it, on how to use it, then I think we'll get more people on it and it'll become a part of their daily life.
Yeah. Rudy and I are talking about 2025 being the year that we do a potential documentary on public transportation. And the challenge or question that we're talking about addressing potentially could be, what's wrong with public transit in America? I just had a guy on the podcast recently from Hong Kong. 90% of the people in Hong Kong ride transit. People in London had the Transport for Commissioner in London, Andy Lord, who, very high percentages, 40 to 50% of the people in London use transit. In America, on a total average, especially outside of New York City, less than 5% of people ride public transit. What in the world's going on here? Why? So that's what we want to explore potentially in this thing.
And I think it's that trust factor. And I don't mind that my friends and family and even some coworkers reach out to me and say, how do I get from here to here? Even though they can literally type that in, they want to hear me say it to them.
That's right.
And explain the little tricks about it so they feel more comfortable with it. Because it's still, even though LA is building out this fantastic transportation system that I'm very excited about, it's still alien to some people because we didn't have it growing up. So, I think having a documentary, having people talk about transportation, having people excited about it, having people make it entertaining, take that 5%. Can you imagine if we went from 5 to 10%, Paul? I mean, how traffic would dissipate, how everything would occur. I don't know. I mean, I'm very excited for the future of LA Metro. What I am curious about, though, I haven't seen much talk about this yet, and I'm hoping there's going to be more news stories about this. As I mentioned, robotaxis are now in Los Angeles. They're now in San Francisco. I'd like to see how those robotaxis are going to be serving some of these transit deserts and how those are going to be used. Because otherwise, my opinion about robotaxis, my opinion about AVs is what I think is somewhat controversial in that, to me, a robotaxi is cute and it's cute for social media, but it's just a car without a driver. And after, you filmed it 20 or 15 times or 30 times that you're in a car without a driver, who cares? Like, how is that solving a traffic problem? Right?
It might actually add to it.
It's definitely going to add to it. Yeah. And it's also, there's already news stories coming out about how rideshare drivers, their earnings are dropping. I mean, some people are suffering economically, right? I think that's why we've been seeing some political changes here. And so what? Rideshare drivers, they're now a big source of incomes going away. I don't know. Like, for me, the future of autonomous vehicles is if we're just literally taking jobs away from rideshare drivers, I'm not interested in that. If we are having autonomous vehicles be a part of the existing transportation system, where they have their own dedicated lanes, where they are away from human drivers, where there are just some minor little infrastructure tweaks so that these driverless cars can talk to each other. So they're not like turning around and honking and going in the wrong ways. If we just have these cars, and they don't need to be full cars, right? They could be driverless pods. They could be smaller little vehicles, and they complement an existing transportation system. That excites me. To me, that's maximizing the use and efficiency of driverless technology. Robotaxis, I'm not very excited about them at all. That's my opinion. I know maybe that's a little bit too controversial. Maybe I'm angering some people, but I have been writing that for over a decade now. So I'm not trying to pick on any companies. I'm not trying to pick on anybody. That's just my opinion. I think we're not utilizing them to their maximum use and safety and efficiency.
Yeah, on the public transit side, you may be aware of this, but Jacksonville Transit Authority, Nat Ford, the CEO, has been quite a visionary there, and he's developing what they call the ultimate urban circulator in Jacksonville, where they have a separate dedicated lanes that they already have. They already have some service on those lanes. They would expand it beyond the 2.5 miles, and it would basically do what you said. It would be 10 to 12 passenger mini buses that are autonomous that would run on regular schedules that people could pick up, and it would not interfere with existing traffic necessarily. It would do all the things we've talked about, integrate into the overall network. There's a niche role. I just got back from Australia, and they're not doing much with autonomous vehicles there. And they asked me, what do you see the role as? And I said, well, from my perspective, what's happening in the U.S. is we're refining what we think the role of them are. And it's a very niche application. If you have a college campus where parking is way away from the campus and it's roasting hot or freezing cold, it'd be great to have a little shuttle going back and forth all day long. You can get into it and go back and forth to your class, or a business campus. But is it ever going to replace, a 40-foot bus or a light rail vehicle or a train? Probably not. But it does lead us to the idea of individually owned autonomous taxi cabs, which are different than autonomous buses. And we talked about Elon Musk, President-elect Trump's new best friend, as they're calling him. He's, obviously has Tesla. And while Trump is saying drill, baby, drill in his pronouncements, his new best friend is saying, I want electric vehicles. So do you see those two conflicting, Rudy? Any thoughts on that?
No, I don't. I mean, do they conflict on the surface? Yeah, I do. But are we ever going to completely eliminate fossil fuels? No, not Paul, not in your lifetime and not in my lifetime. Like that's just, although if you listen to Good Is in the Details, it's a philosophy podcast. There's an ongoing joke about me trying to live forever. That it's a whole my philosophy, fear of death type stuff. And like, like Elon's trying to put implants and transfer people to computers. Right. So Elon, I will volunteer, but that's not the point here.
Okay.
No, fossil fuels they're an important part of the U.S. economy. They're an important part of our security and safety. They're an important part of our, economic powerhouse here, right? What I like to see is the other day I took my kids over to Top Golf here in El Segundo, and
I love Top Golf.
The EV charging stations,
yeah,
sponsored by Shell, right? And that was great. I love to see that these traditional fossil fuel companies are getting more into clean energy, and we can't just have an immediate transition overnight, Paul. It's just not going to happen. That's like me saying, oh, driverless cars, we should just rebuild the infrastructure and then we can all go to sleep in our pods and never have to drive it. It's going to be a slow transition. And that's why we need to double down on our infrastructure, right? And that's why I'm such a big proponent of talking about infrastructure finance, talking about municipal bonds, educating people about the importance of municipal bonds, educating people about the importance of finance in a clean way. I mean, I'm not as worried about drill, baby, drill as I am, about tax exemption going away.
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Let's switch over to that. I think that's a very interesting topic that people may not understand. Can you explain that?
Sure. Okay. So United States, right? Great country. Guess what we have that no other country, to my knowledge, has?
What's that?
Tax-exempt municipal bonds. The vast majority of our infrastructure in this country is financed by municipal bonds. So if you own a municipal bond, a tax-exempt municipal bond, because there's taxable municipal bonds, there's tax-exempt municipal bonds. But if you hold a federally tax-exempt municipal bond, you don't have to remit that interest to the federal government. Basically, it's a subsidy from the federal government, allowing local governments, your schools, your transit agencies, your water agencies, et cetera, hospitals, et cetera, to borrow at lower interest rates, so the cost of the infrastructure that we individuals all use every day to take our kids to school, to go to work, to travel, it's a lower cost. So Tax Cut and Jobs Act 2017, first couple of renditions of it, definitely in the first one, muni tax exemption was gone, right? Because they're making all these tax cuts and they're shifting things here and they're shifting things there. They're like, well, we got to take from here in order to pay from there. Muni tax exemption was gone. Muni tax exemption wound up staying alive, but they did make some changes that have impacted local governments. With one of them being that you can no longer advance refund on a tax exempt basis one time for free. And now they're talking about, hey, okay, no, let's not tax on tips. Let's not tax on overtime. Let's not tax. And how are you going to pay for that? Well, one of the things that people have been floating, and maybe it's just people fear mongering, maybe it's clickbait, I don't know. But having been like in my, mid to late 30s in 2017 and saw tax exemption being talked about being taken away, I got pretty scared. And so 7-8 years later, I'm a little less afraid of it, but it's something that we need to talk about. If you get rid of tax exemption, the costs of borrowing for local governments will absolutely rise. And so what does that mean? Taxes will rise. Property taxes may have to rise. The fees may have to rise. The sewer revenues may have to, the water revenue. So we're going to pay for it. The individuals will pay for it one way or the other. So it's a scary thing for municipal governments. Obviously, it's going to impact transportation. It's going to impact anything and everything that you could think of. That's how important muni tax exemption is.
That's good. Yeah, just to elaborate on that a little bit more. So I think that in a previous life, I was a county administrator and a county commissioner. And this is how it works, folks. We go to the local cities and local county governments, the commissioners and their finance folks go to New York once a year to the bond rating agencies, to Fitch, Standard & Poor's, and Moody's, which I did these visits, and we pitch the county government. Queen Anne's County, where I'm from, where I was a county administrator, or when I was in Charles County, Maryland, this is why we're a strong county, and we can guarantee that we're going to repay the debt that we borrow from you to build a new school, to buy some new buses for our county, to build a new road, to build a park, to do AstroTurf on our soccer fields or football fields for our high schools, all that stuff. Anything over, $500,000, normally we bond that. We don't pay it with pay-go money. And so we borrow that money. And so you'll see on your local government's budget each year, there's a line of debt service. That's what that debt service is. We're paying back the bonds, and we normally get really good interest rates, like Rudy just said, 2.5%, 3% on these. Whereas if you're borrowing your own money, you're trying to buy a house right now, it's 6.5%, 7%. And so, like you said, it's a lot less. And institutional investors will buy up these bonds, as will individuals, because they're tax-free, as Rudy said. And so if they weren't tax-free anymore, the county government would then have to pay higher interest rates on the amount of money that we've borrowed, which means that there would be less new projects built or your taxes would go up. So that's the municipal side from my mind. Rudy's giving you the finance side. Together they meet and kind of hopefully show you a full picture. Let's move on to the next topic, Rudy. That was great. And that is the intersection of entertainment and transportation. You and I are both into that. Most folks know we have a TV show, Transit Unplugged TV, which is a travel show. Matter of fact, just yesterday, I did my first podcast interview on another guy's travel podcast, talking about the travel we've done for the show and what we've learned. So entertainment, we try to open each episode of Transit Unplugged TV with a fun, entertaining sequence. For instance, I just did Australia. We were in Brisbane. We were going to go jet skiing to showcase the Noosa River. And my creative director came up with a crazy idea, which we ended up doing, which people will see in the February episode. Me opening like a James Bond movie, coming in with a full suit on, driving the jet ski, out there, jumping and all that in the suit, and then coming in to open the show. My name is Comfort, Paul Comfort, and I've got a license to ride, and, it's funny stuff like that. So we try to grab people's attention through the entertainment value and then show them the food, fun, and culture of a region, but then also how you can use public transportation, just like Rudy does in LA, to get around that city to see all the fun things we just showed you. You've got another angle on entertainment. Give us your angle.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually perfect that you brought up entertainment right after we just talked about funding, right? Because maybe when people were listening to the municipal bond part of this whole thing, like they do, like my wife, their eyes rolled or they stopped paying attention. Just kidding, honey. But yeah, most people, when I start talking about muni bonds and tax exemption, all that type of stuff, they're not paying attention. So I got to go. I'm thinking, how do I get people interested in this?
How
do I get people to care? And what you do on Transit Unplugged, and you're showing these public transportation systems, and I watch Transit, and you're showing people how to get around the cities with it. That's where I think is the most important part. If people can see what public transportation system that's alien to them, or they're afraid of, Paul, if they could see where their tax dollars are going to, if they're seeing that, oh my God, I don't need to rent a car. Oh my God, I don't have to wait in traffic. Oh my God, I could sit with my kids and have like free sightseeing via a safe public transportation system, then people will care more. So the connection, the doubling down on entertainment by me and by you is so people will care more about their public transit systems, and maybe they'll be willing to pay more, right? Let's say muni tax exemption goes away. Are we just going to stop funding public transportation? No, we're going to need to double down even more on the importance of it and show people what they're getting for their dollars and how important it is, especially if the costs are rising. I like to bring entertainment into it, just because it's I have such a deep passion for transportation. I can't expect anybody to have the passion for it. And that passion was instilled in me from my grandmother. She immigrated to this country in the 70s. She didn't speak English, and she taught herself how to use the bus system in North Orange County. And she instilled in me from a very, very, very young age about what a great country we live in, because you can use a bus system and you can get around on public transportation. And that stayed with me for the rest of my life. And as a result, I'm trying to like double down on that passion and spread that to other people and say, hey, look, like we should really care about public transportation. You know, you can use it for entertainment purposes. You can use it to get around. You can spend more time with your family. I'm a big believer, Paul, and this is why I was talking about a lot about the Inglewood People Mover and how important it is going to these stadiums. The transportation aspect, Paul, of going to an event can ruin an event. Let me give you an example. So I'm a big punk rock fan. I was in a bunch of punk rock bands back in the day. I went to it was like punk rock Woodstock out in Pomona, California. Okay, it was called the No Values concert. I spent 5.5 hours ingress and egress from this concert.
Yes, I hate
and it ruined it for me.
Yeah.
I wrote a Forbes.com article about how horrible it was that there was literally a Metrolink station only a quarter of a mile away or a half a mile away, or easy shuttle bus. They didn't coordinate the two. And a lot of people, I mean, I went onto Reddit, I went on a whole bunch of places, and a lot of people are like, I'll never go again. I'll never go again. I'll never go again. If you've ever been to a concert and it had a horrible transportation experience, it'll make you think twice about going to that concert.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, it's one of the reasons why I don't go to Coachella anymore. I'm like, look, I've done it twice. I can't do it. I can't deal with it. So there's a huge connection between enjoyment of entertainment events and transportation. And more people got to care about that, and more companies got to care about that, and more cities got to care about that. Because if we're spending the amount of dollars that we're spending for these sporting events and these concerts, and it's getting ruined because the ingress and egress and because there's no option, you know what? Then the value of those concerts, they might drop. I don't know. Right. I mean, there's so much virtual reality these days with concerts and movies and sporting events. How is that going to impact these live events? If people really hate getting into and out of an event, that's going to impact things. So I think for business reasons, people should care more about transportation. That's my connection of entertainment and transportation, Paul.
Yeah. That's great. You know, there were big music concerts across America and Canada this year by a certain starlet, very popular singer, that she was promoting, hey, use public transportation to get to my concerts. Yeah, because she knew that it was going to ruin people's experience, probably, like you said, if they had to wait around in big traffic. Taylor Swift. Yeah, I mean, everybody knows it. But yeah, she.
Man. God bless her, man.
Yeah, go ahead. What were you saying?
No, I was just, that's fantastic. She probably got people, Paul, to use public transportation for the first time in their life.
That's
and you know what? They might use it again.
That's right.
We need more Taylor Swift saying this type of stuff. I know Beyonce did something as well. She worked with the Washington Metro to like keep the trains going late because it was raining. And we need more. We need more artists that care about transportation. That's why I talk incessantly about it.
All right, lightning round. We're coming close to the end, but I want to get your thoughts on what I consider the 3 F's of transportation going into 2025. I recently spoke about this in Brisbane, and I want to get your take on it. The first is fueling. Where are we at on fueling for public transportation going into 2025, do you think?
Yeah, I think electrification of transportation is still going to be a pretty big topic. On the commute Substack, I actually had a whole little sub article about there was this electric train. I think it's called the Tesla train in Germany. It's literally run on electricity in Germany, and it's been a wonderful kind of test case for clean transportation. So obviously most light rails run on electricity, but big rail is not still run on diesel fuel.
Heavy rail, yeah.
So, I actually, worked on the Caltrain. Caltrain is the big train that runs from San Jose up to San Francisco. And we worked on the financing for the electrification of that train. So I do think that electrification is going to be big into the future. Now, is it just going to be electrification? What about hydrogen? Everyone seems to be talking about hydrogen these days. And that, so I think fueling, will there be some drill under Trump with fracking? Yeah, I think there will be, and maybe there'll be clean ways to do it. But I don't think electrification is going away. I think we need to double down on building out our grid. We need to think about alternatives. I think the nuclear conversation has to come back into vogue, if you will. Maybe smaller scale nuclear projects. I know Google's looking at a couple of them. So fueling, when you talk about fuel, I'm not just literally talking about gas. I'm talking about anything that can make things run. Right. And I think in 2025, that's one of the reasons, it's going to be pretty exciting.
Keolis has proposed to MBTA, the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority in Boston, for their commuter rail, it's the largest commuter rail in America, to start trying out new electric trains that have big batteries in them. So you have the catenary wires above as you get close to the station, but then as you get out on the track and you get away from the wires, it switches over to the batteries. And then it comes back up at the other end. They're doing that in other places in the world is what I understand, but this may be the first place in the U.S. And so that looks like that's moving forward. The other thing I was going to mention, what I'm hearing from people on the fueling side for public transportation is there probably won't be any more money coming from the FTA under Trump for battery electric buses. However, that doesn't mean that there still won't be local funding and state funding in states like California, where you're at, where they're going to continue to provide a push toward that. Let's move to the second topic, and that is funding. Where do you think funding will go? As you know, in America, public transportation is funded by a mix of federal, state, and local dollars and fares and advertising. Do you have any thoughts on where we're going now that, ridership is still only around 70 to 80% of transit agencies' pre-pandemic ridership? Government agencies are, all coming to the end of the subsidies that came from the federal government for the CARES Act, the CRISA Act, and the ARPA Act, which were unusual one-time funding mechanisms to help us make up for the impact of COVID. Where do we go? San Francisco BART is one of the big agencies that's been saying, hey, we're at our fiscal cliff. Philadelphia just announced last month. You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I got a lot of thoughts on the fiscal. Funding is going to be huge. And I think there's a lot. I'm on conversations right now with transit agencies out here in California, and they're scared. They just are. I'm not going to name any names, but we're all watching. And there's so many different things, aspects of balls in the air, if you will, that can affect funding for transit agencies. That and then you throw in, and tax exemption might go away for munis. I do think that what transit agencies are doing with doubling down on fare evaders. I know that's a big issue with LA Metro. I know the federal government really cares about fare evaders, and they sometimes tie funding to that. And I think that's going to be something that transit agencies are going to have to focus on. I think right now it's going to be the wait and see. I think that the vast majority of our transportation funding is funded by the gas tax. Okay. Gas tax is, you got the federal level, at the state level, sometimes at the local level. As electric vehicles have been rising, right, the gas tax has been impacted by that. Yep. I've been arguing for years that, hey, look, guys, this is not sustainable. We got to come up with something else to help with our infrastructure. Is it going to be vehicle miles traveled? Is it going to be some kind of user fees? I don't know. Is that really going to be realistic under a Republican regime? I don't know. But the reality is, sorry to pick on EV drivers. I love EVs, and my wife has one, and we have a hybrid, et cetera, et cetera. The reality is, the more EVs, the less financing for roads because of the gas tax. Something's got to happen there. So I think that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Here in Maryland, the state where I'm at, there's a special commission looking at exactly what you just said, Rudy, with introduction of more EVs, the gas tax is going down. And so there is a lot of talk of at least, even if we don't go to road usage charges, at least raising the registration fees for battery electric cars to be the equivalent of what the average person may spend in gas tax in a year, to make it fair, to make it equitable, so that electric cars driving on the same roads a gas car is driving on, you should help pay for road maintenance. And I don't think people would see that's unfair. I've just done a series of podcasts about that and talks with one of my friends, the former Secretary of Transportation of California, who is working on that for the company he works for now. And so it's a hot topic. Last one, you touched on it. Give us a little bit more on faring. So there was a lot of, people fell in love with the idea that transit could be free after the pandemic. And then they realized, wait a minute, really what people want when you do surveys, and by the way, it's the same in Australia, when you say, why aren't you riding transit? First is, it's not frequent enough. Second is, it doesn't go where I want it to go. Third is, I don't feel safe on it. Fourth is, I got to pay for it. So it's not even in the top three. And transit agencies need more money now, not less. What are your thoughts on faring going into 2025?
And the reason why I even brought up faring with the whole fiscal cliff aspect of it is exactly what you're saying. When these transit agencies fall off that fiscal cliff, right? That's when they go into the death spiral. What's the death spiral? Right. The death spiral is, the only way that they're going to be able to stay, operable is if they start cutting service. Well, guess what happens when you start cutting service?
Exactly.
You get less people on it. Now, out here in California, a lot of our transit agencies, a lot of the projects at least, and probably some of the operations, they're funded by sales taxes, right? We have the county, LA Metro is primarily funded by countywide sales taxes. They have many of those measures. And so anytime you buy anything in LA County and it's subject to the sales tax, a portion of that goes to the transit agency. Not every transit agency has the benefit of a sales tax. Some agencies like BART, they're ticket fares, right? So it's like, it's all about, is it fare box revenue that's your primary funding source, or is it sales tax revenues? So if you're fare box revenue dependent, there's no way you can be free. If you're more sales tax dependent, I guess you could be free. I'm not a big believer in free. I mean, there's a lot of programs for students. There's a lot of program properly so for disabled and elderly and veteran. I mean, a lot of those programs are there.
Yeah.
I think if people can afford it, in fact, I think by paying for it, they realize how much money that they save by using public transportation. How much did you save on parking? How much did you save on not using the toll road? How much did you save on car maintenance? And let's just take it just one step further. What about the health benefits of public transportation? What about the walking? I think this is my opinion. If this is controversial, I apologize. I think there's an obesity epidemic in America because we're not walking enough. I think the car, while wonderful as it is, has definitely contributed to the negative health aspects of where we are at. And I think if people actually implemented public transportation more, they would also, be healthier. That's what I do. I purposely sometimes even stop a station or two away. If I know there's like a hill or if I know there's like a nice little walk, I will do that extra walk to get in even more steps in my day. That's what I try to do, Paul.
That's a great idea. Now, I haven't really thought about that. The walking,
maybe that'll be a part of the documentary.
Yeah,
the health
aspects. Yeah, the walking. I've thought of the health, but I've never thought about it being the walking to the bus stop. That's a really good point. We don't get enough steps in our life. We are very sedentary these days, and with, like you said, everything virtual. We sit in our houses on our couch or on our phones. Dude, that's a really good point and a great way to kind of wrap up the show. Thank you so much, Rudy, for being a part of the Transit Unplugged podcast in our New Year's Eve episode as we look into 2025. I'm sure we'll check back with you later in 2025 and see if your predictions came true.
Sounds great, Paul. Thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you for listening to the final episode of Transit Unplugged of 2024, and thanks to our guest, Rudy Salo, for joining us. Hi, I'm Tris Hussey, editor of the podcast, and coming up for our first episode of 2025, we have the second episode from Australia. Now, next week, we have a true transit legend on the show, Howard Collins. Howard has been in transit for over 47 years and is currently the Coordinator General for Transport for New South Wales. In this captivating interview with Paul, Howard dispenses invaluable wisdom about transit, careers, and leadership, all the while expressing his passion for transit and the work he does. Don't miss this episode coming back to you on our usual Wednesday publishing slot. Transit Unplugged is brought to you by Modaxo. At Modaxo, we're passionate about moving the world's people, and at Transit Unplugged, we're passionate about telling those stories. So until next week and next year, we wish you a Happy New Year.